I am honored and privileged to introduce you to Bob Goddard, Corey Rotella, and Hannah Hedges. These three talented individuals are the brains and the pens behind CNA Edge, a voice from the trenches of long-term care. You will learn so much more about who they are as people, as professionals, and as advocates as they speak, but I'd like to share just a little bit of background about each of them with you so you know who they are. Bob Goddard is the founder and editor of CNA Edge. He has 35 years of experience in long-term care, including 25 years as a caregiver in a state-run home for veterans. Bob graduated from Grand Valley State University with a BA in Social Studies and is currently employed as a freelance writer. Corey Ann Rotella stumbled into caregiving 8 years ago. To her delight, she discovered she had a knack and a passion for the work. To her dismay, she also discovered all the challenges that both workers and residents face due to the many flaws in the system. When she was approached by Bob with his idea for CNA Edge, she jumped at the chance. It was a unique opportunity to combine her passion for advocacy, ability to connect with people, and lifelong love of writing, and she's been grateful to be part of the solution ever since. She lives in Wilmington, North Carolina. In her free time, she volunteers at a behavioral health center, enjoys painting, reading, and exploring life. And Hannah Hedges was the third writer to join CNA Edge. She saw a post on a CNA Facebook page, fired off an email asking to join, and never looked back. She's been a CNA for 5 years and is pursuing a degree in psychology. Besides writing for CNA Edge, she's also working on a novel. She lives in southern Indiana with her family. I also encountered CNA Edge first via a Facebook post, and I have been an avid fan ever since. Always looking forward to seeing that next post pop up in my inbox, and frequently sending it along to others, some of you in this room, with a note that goes something like, "You have to read this!" Because I cannot contain myself after reading something they have so precisely and eloquently put their finger on and articulated in a powerful way that I wish I were able to. Their writing is honest, it's frank, it's sometimes challenging, it's always thought-provoking, and it's filled with insights drawn from their entire range of experiences working daily as care partners, alongside their coworkers and within a system that's often difficult to endure and in many ways broken. I ask you to listen to their words with open hearts and open minds. Think about how similar or how different are they from your own experiences, and what we can each do in response to the important calls to action they will raise. As a final note, they have compiled their first year's worth of posts into a book, which they will be available to sign outside of today's session for those of you who fall in love with them as I have. The book will also be in the bookstore throughout the conference. So without further ado, please welcome CNA Edge.
My name is Bob Goddard, also known as Young.
My name is Corey Rotella, otherwise known as Alice.
My name is Hannah Hedges, aka May.
And we are the writers from CNA Edge. I'd like to thank Rhoda for that gracious introduction, and also thank the Pioneer Network for this amazing opportunity to share our work. CNA Edge is an opinion blog that deals with issues in long-term care from the CNA's perspective. Since March of 2014, 3 regular contributors have published over 280 posts on the blog and typically post 2 or 3 times a week. The essays describe what it feels like to be a caregiver, the unique blend of thoughts and emotions that are widely experienced but rarely discussed. Now, I think it's safe to say that most caregivers would agree that there is a gap between themselves and the rest of the long-term care system. It's a gap in experience, perception, and communication. While a hierarchical system provides the illusion of continuity and cohesion, the gap is very real, and it shapes the caregiver's work environment, and more to the point, directly impacts how our elders experience their time in long-term care. But our purpose here is not to simply call attention to this gap or bemoan its inefficiencies or injustices. No, we're here to bridge that gap. CNA is an independent voice. We do not belong to any group, and we're not affiliated with any other organization, and we are not beholden to anyone or anything save our own principles. And we do not pull punches. While we don't claim to represent the CNA community, our experience is representative of the experience of typical caregivers, their thoughts and feelings. If we stand out, it's only because we speak out. There are legions of direct care workers out there who know that there is something fundamentally wrong with the system as it exists, who would yearn for a better way to do things, who would absolutely embrace the principles of culture change and person-directed care. We just have to give them a fighting chance to make it real. Do you want a revolution? Yes. Do you want to transform the culture of aging in America? Yes. You have an army at your disposal, and they've been ready to go for a long, long time. Everything that we have experienced as caregivers has convinced us that genuine culture change cannot be made real until those who establish policy and enforce standards develop a deeper awareness of what caregivers and caregiving is really all about. And the onus is on us, on caregivers, to impart that. So if what you hear in the next 45 minutes or so just takes one step toward closing that gap, we'll consider our time here a success. Thank you.
Healthcare is a different world, and long-term care is a strange corner of that world.
We are all bigger than the labels slapped upon us.
A life spent caring for others can never truly be called wasted. I could certainly have done something different with my life, something that brought me a bigger paycheck, but I could never have done anything better with myself.
I don't know at what point society decided that once a person reaches a certain age or level of disability, they no longer have to be treated as a person if it isn't cost effective. I only know that it is fundamentally, ethically, and morally wrong. We as caregivers are in a unique position to stand against this mentality.
Just a CNA.
AIDS are seen as a disposable resource.
The long-term care system is a perfect example of misplaced acceptance.
In a recent Facebook thread, CNAs voicing their displeasure over low wages were confronted by a poster who told the workers that she was sick and tired of all their whining, and if they really wanted better pay, they should go get their degrees, like she did. And from the lofty heights that her academic career has obviously taken her, she proclaimed that being a CNA is not a real career, and that.
It is meant to be a stepping stone.
Really? Direct care is meant to be a stepping stone? Meant to be? By who? When and where was this decided? I can just imagine the conversation at the Bad Premise National Corporate Headquarters. Smithers, since you're the head of the Department of Faulty Syllogisms, I want you to establish a position in long-term care that will help career-minded nurses get their feet wet.
Yes, sir, we can do that. We can call the position Certified Nurse's Assistant.
I think that sounds costly, Smithers.
Not at all, sir. We wouldn't have to pay them much. It's just a step, after all, it's just a step to something better.
I like the way you think, Smithers.
And as a secondary benefit, we could have these nurses-to-be provide direct care for the residents.
Brilliant.
Not at all, sir. It was meant to be.
The position of CNA is not meant to be a stepping stone. The reason it exists is resident care. Using it as a stepping stone is a side benefit. The distinction is critical in regard to wages. Obviously, CNA work can benefit an aspiring RN candidate in many ways. I'm not disputing that. In fact, I would go beyond that and say that direct care work experience is a great way to learn all kinds of life and work lessons in any kind of work. Or for that matter, those lessons can be used to become a better CNA. Life will never stop teaching you as long as you're open to the offer. If Smithers and the degreed but crabby Facebook poster are right, and aid work is meant to be a stepping stone, then the CNA is essentially reduced to an apprentice status. Our role can only be correctly understood within the context of a career medical path. This is a narrow vision of the work. If the focus is truly on the resident, then the apprentice model cannot apply. While CNAs work under the RN's license and supervision, direct care has evolved into a specialized function. A CNA is not there to learn the RN's craft by working side by side the master, but must be regarded as a vital component of the larger care team. While our roles are closely related, we are not simply miniature versions of RNs. In other lines of work, it's understood that apprentices will endure minimal pay and low status because it's part of a larger program with rewards up the ladder. When this model is inappropriately applied to CNAs, it creates a fallacious argument for accepting low wages. It's an argument that comes dangerously close to justifying using caregivers as you would an expendable resource to be depleted, disposed of, and replaced, because you know it's not a real career anyway.
Number 1, you learn to adapt quickly and adjust your game plan. The plan was to give 2 showers before breakfast, except your coworker had an emergency and isn't coming into work. You are now flying solo on the hall. 4 call lights are going off before you even clock in, and there's a shortage of towels. Quick, what do? I've learned that any plan, no matter how well thought out, has to be flexible in this field. Everyone wants what they want when they want it, and as much as we would like to meet everyone's needs without a wrinkle, sometimes it just isn't possible. When I feel like I'm in the pressure cooker, I take a deep breath and remind myself that I only have 2 hands. I explain the situation to my folks and let them know that I will get to them whatever they need as soon as I can, but they need to be patient. I adjust my plan for the shift to meet the reality of what the day is, rather than try to employ a plan that I had for what I thought the day would be. 2, conversations that are insane to others become our norm. Upon arrival to work one morning, I see that someone decided to try her hand at graffiti art at some point in the night. Why did you write, "I need a plunger" in red ink on the wall?
Because I couldn't sleep.
Do you need a plunger?
Not particularly, but I got my point across.
3, occasionally you will find yourself attempting to meet demands that make no sense.
I need you to go to my room, take 3 packages of vinegar out of the plastic tub that's under my bed, cut them open, bring them in a styrofoam cup to me in the big bathroom. Immediately.
Number 4, you will shrug off being bombarded by any number of bodily fluids. Colostomy bags leak, catheter bags splash, medications can cause nausea, skin tears bleed. It's not a question of if your scrubs will be decorated by something that would have those not in the healthcare field freaking out. It's a question of when. I learned to adapt to this pretty early in my career. What we need to remember is that as difficult as it may be to maintain a straight face during these incidents, it is absolutely vital to the emotional and mental well-being of our residents. It's difficult enough for them without having those of us responsible for their care unintentionally making them feel badly about something that they can't help. Usually I make a joke and laugh it off. This lightens the mood and makes them feel better. Number 5, humor will save your sanity. I cannot stress this enough. We deal with a lot of heavy issues at work: illness, death, emotional instability, and that's not even taking into account our own personal stresses and troubles. Whether it's gallows humor, appreciation for irony, hell, even knock-knock jokes or puns, a finely honed sense of humor is a balm that eases the burns of living and working in a world that can be very bleak at times. Some may call it whistling in the dark, but I look at humor as a way of expressing hope and an unwillingness to allow the difficult time to completely erode the light within. Number 6, you will have days that make you wonder why you are in this field. Some days, everything falls apart. Some days, your folks are all acting out and your coworkers are not being supportive. Management does not seem to care about you or your residents. The system designed to protect the most vulnerable is failing them. You feel underpaid, overworked, underappreciated, and alone. I get that. I mean, God knows I have had those stretches. And if I didn't learn coping skills, I'd have burnt out a long time ago. Those are the times that teach us. And for me, the ability to push through and land on my feet brings such a feeling of accomplishment. It's the tough shifts that have taught me how to adapt, how to grow in stressful situations, how to work in a way I feel good about regardless of who's watching. Even so, I still have those moments when I question whether I'm cut out for this. When they arise, I trust that they will pass, and then remember that I am in this field for a reason. Number 7, if you stay in this field long enough, your perception of life will be altered. For better or for worse, if you stay in long-term care for any length of time, your perception of life will be changed. It is inevitable. The amount of emotional and physical energy expended by direct care workers each day leaves its mark. It should. It's only natural to be affected by our line of work. Deep bonds with our residents form naturally out of the trust that is such an integral part of the caregiver and resident relationship. And that's a beautiful thing. It's a rare gift, but it is not without its difficulties. We deal with loss regularly, short staffing, unreasonable workloads, inconsistent supervisors, and earn very little money. I have seen these conditions change enthusiastic caregivers into jaded, burnt-out workers who just go through the motion. If these conditions are all we see in the work environment, depression is a very real possibility. The good news is that we as workers have a choice on how we view what we do. All of the above is true, and I accept that as a fact. I do. But it is equally true that this job will teach you about life, people, who you are, and who you want to be if you're open to it. It has taught me to adapt, rally, recover, accept loss. It's a consistent reminder of how grateful I am for my life. It has shown me that I am strong when I once thought I was weak, and that when push comes to shove, I am capable of putting my money where my mouth is and taking a stand. I've learned that you do not need a job title to be an advocate. My folks have taught me about resilience and courage and how to set boundaries. I learned from my coworkers, and I learned from working in this broken system. No matter which direction my path leads me in the future, I will take these lessons that I have learned with me. And because of that, my life will have a depth of purpose that was lacking before. And I feel infinitely richer because of it.
Telling people not to get too attached to those they care for is like telling them not to be human. Sometimes that connection is the only thing that keeps us from moving on. The caregiver-resident connection is the glue that holds long-term care together.
Movements are steady, smooth, and practiced. As many times as I've done this, they ought to be. My fingers are flying, pulling away the old brief, sliding the new one in, and snapping down the tabs. I've done this so many times that it's muscle memory. My thoughts are free to roam, and roam they do. Right to all the work I have left to do, all the people I have yet to take care of. Basically, it's not been a good day, and I'm just not feeling it. I can't really tell which way the flow goes, if it's a bad day because I'm in a bad mood, or if I'm in a bad mood because it's a bad day. It doesn't really matter. The result is the same either way. My resident is sitting quietly on the commode, just watching me. She hardly ever talks, and she's always been a quiet one, like she's lost inside her own head. She hardly ever talks, and even when she does, it's usually in words of one syllable. Yeah, sometimes it seems like she's been reduced to the status of an observer in her own life. Suddenly, I'm startled by a movement not mine, her hand coming down towards me. From this angle, I get a good look at her nails. They're too long, and they've got gunk under them. Great. Another thing I failed to do. Another reminder of the crappy care this crappy day has pushed me into providing. Then her fingers curl under my chin, and my attention is drawn away from her nails and back up to her face, her eyes. She looks thoughtful. She looks stern. She looks concerned.
Smile.
I look at her and I think, it's not just her life that she's forced to observe with little control over its direction. She also watches me. Day in and day out, she watches me come in and care for her, get her dressed, changed, fed. She watches me come in her room, rush around like a madwoman, and vanish again. Does she wonder when she'll see me again after I leave? Does she know why I have to hurry? Oh, God. And she tell when I don't want to be here. I think I have my answer for that last one. I still have a ridiculous amount of work waiting for me. I still have far too many residents I need to take care of before my shift is over. But right now, care can't be a checklist in my mind, a constant struggle I'll never win. Care, right now, is this one resident sitting on a toilet, commanding me to smile. Ridiculous as that sounds. Because she has just made it abundantly clear that she cares far more about my attitude than her unmade bed and even her saturated brief. I still don't feel like smiling, or being here for that matter, but I force my lips to curl upwards. She leans forward, and I'm instantly concerned about the greedy grasp of gravity with all of her weight so far forward. Well, if she falls off, at least I'm between her and the floor.
Good enough for now.
Yeah, it is. For now. Today we'll smile, even when we don't feel like it. Tomorrow we'll do better.
Everyone is having stomach trouble. Everyone is calling my name. The call bells aren't working correctly. They took my partner off the floor without bothering to inform me, and I'm flying solo on the hall. Again. The painters are back, and the entire place smells of fumes. There's a memorial for a resident that we recently lost that I was hoping to attend. That's not gonna happen. Not today. It's one of those days. Time to buckle down, put on my big girl boots, and get moving. Lately, these sorts of days have been the rule rather than the exception. Lack of communication, no possibility of raises, dishonesty, double standards, and poor leadership is pretty much guaranteed that we will remain short-staffed, and what little staff we have will remain disgruntled. And the talking heads in the office seem genuinely confused as to why there is such dysfunction on the floor. It's baffling to me. I thought to myself as I juggled the pile of towels in one arm and pushed the laundry bin with the other while navigating through a maze of paint cans on the floor, they cannot possibly be this obtuse. They have advanced degrees. And yet, and that is the truth of it. Administrators, in my experience anyway, have no idea of the reality on the floor. And what's worse, they have little to no interest in learning. They are the I-dotters and T-crossers of the long-term care world. If it looks good on paper, then it's okay by them. They are thrilled that we had no deficiencies by state. And yet they have a mandatory meeting on properly using a Hoyer lift 2 weeks after the resident for whom it was needed had arrived. 2 weeks after we were forced to learn how to use it on our own. And yet we are constantly short-staffed. And despite my residents getting new headboards, they are forced to sleep on the same old, torn, stained, sagging mattresses that was bought used years ago. And the call bells do not work properly. The fact that they got no deficiencies by state is not a reason to be proud of us. It's a reason to be ashamed of state. Honestly, to slapping some paint on the walls blind them to what's underneath? Any lasting change comes from within, not without. Fix what's inside and the outside will take care of itself. If the heads of these facilities act in an unprofessional manner, then for the most part, they will have a staff that acts unprofessionally. It is unacceptable to discuss issues with staff members in front of their peers. It causes dissent, gossip, fears of favoritism, and a generally toxic environment. It is disrespectful to speak in a demeaning tone to us, but it is altogether wrong to use that same tone with the residents. I don't care if you're the president of the universe. If one of my folks comes to me in tears because of something that you said to her, I will be bringing that issue directly to your desk. As much as I like to get along with people, if I'm forced to choose between not offending my boss or advocating for my residents, I will always, always, always choose my residents. It is not too much to ask that you know their names. It is not too much to ask that you see them as people, that you see us as people. As I wrapped up my duties at the end of my shift, I reminded myself that a job title does not dictate leadership, much less people skills. There are those of us who hang in there shift after shift, despite the current dysfunction. We take pride in what we do, and in our devotion to our folks, we hold our own kind of leadership. It does not announce itself with plaques on a wall. It does not shout its power in loud demands or threats drenched in ego. It is the echoes of our footsteps running down the hall to meet the needs of our residents. It is in the warm comfort of our hugs given to a person in need. And it is in our resolve to march forward and do what we can to make the most of this dysfunctional system, to never stop speaking our truths for ourselves and for our residents, to be the face of consistency for our residents in such times of uncertainty and change. When we allow it, incompetent management helps us examine what leadership really can be and teaches us how to become leaders in our own right. As I clocked out, one of my residents called out to me.
Hey, Corey, you're going to be here tomorrow, aren't you?
Smiled back at him. You bet I am, with bells on.
Even in the worst work environments, caregivers have the opportunity to make an immediate and positive impact on how their residents experience their life in long-term care. So much of what our elders experience depends on the quality of the interactions that we have with them. Whatever our difficulties, we are ultimately responsible for the manner in which we approach and respond to our residents. At the same time, how we conduct ourselves as caregivers has significance that can go beyond our ability to impact the immediate environment. Caregiving is a practical art. Our role involves us in the details of the daily routines of our residents, but not necessarily in the larger problems of long-term care. While we are profoundly affected by things like poor staffing ratios, direct care staff turnover, and disconnected management, the conventional wisdom among caregivers is that we simply do not have the authority to do much about those things. And the only option that we really have is to accept things as they are, or find a different place or field to work. Meanwhile, we leave the larger problems to those who we believe have the real power, the administrators, regulators, legislators, and assorted long-term care professionals. However, no one has greater awareness than direct care workers of how chronic understaffing and turnover rates actually impact the care and well-being of residents on a day-to-day basis. We know what it looks like. And we know what it feels like to our residents in a very real way. We can give these problems texture and a real sense of the human cost. Our experience in the trenches of long-term care provides us with a unique perspective, a perspective that is very much needed if long-term care is to ever truly come to grips with its problems. While caregivers lack formal authority, we can still influence those who do have formal authority. Our real-world experience gives us something valuable to say. Our capacity to convince others that what we have to say is valid depends on our moral authority. But if we are not doing everything we can as caregivers to improve the immediate environment of our residents, then why should anyone listen to us? By taking responsibility for our own behavior and conducting ourselves according to what we know by reason is right, in spite of difficult circumstances, we provide the basis for our moral authority. And with that, we cannot be ignored.
The hardest part about this job is losing a resident. It hurts, but you have to keep moving. And while you never really get used to it, you do learn how to handle the death of someone you've cared for. Writing is how I cope. Putting words on paper is how I make sense of the madness and the pain in my world. One time, right after the funeral home had taken the body, I just couldn't wait. I went into her bathroom, grabbed a paper towel, and jotted down what would become this free-form poem. It's rough, but that's all right. Raw was how I felt when I wrote this, and raw is how I feel when I remember. A last kiss on your forehead, still warm to the touch, but soon you'll be cold. A last whispered I love you, because it's not just money that is luring me here. How do you say goodbye? You were dying when I met you. They called it going downhill. Every day just a little worse, and now you're dying no more. But how do I say goodbye? Sponge down your body, you shouldn't be so still. Wash and fold your hands, new sheets for the bed. I can't say I'm sorry. You're not in pain anymore. A last touch, and then I'm done. Move on to the living. I can't help you anymore. I have 7 other people who still need me today. You're gone, and I can't cry. Then tomorrow is here, and you're still gone. A new face in your bed, new stories to learn. I have to keep working, and so I move on. It's a year down the road, and your face is fading. I guess I've said goodbye. Still, I sit down and cry because I cannot remember how I made your coffee. How do you remember everyone you've ever lost? Every quirk, every smile, all the tears cried together. Please, can you tell me, how do I say goodbye?
There are a lot of horror stories in long-term care. We write a lot about the flaws in the system, the bad times and the unreasonableness of what we're expected to do. And that is as it should be. There is much to lament, much to change. Nothing is going to change if we keep silent about the bad. So why do we, the aides, stay in long-term care? Why do we put up with all the literal and figurative crap that we deal with every day? I stay in the long-term care for the little moments, those beautiful shards of clarity in a fog of frustration and fatigue. The blissfully unaware resident who goes about the facility snagging other people's shoes and tucking them under her shirt. The resident who says, "Of course," when I say she looks pretty. The resident who shares war stories with me while he sits on the pot, rubbing lotion onto dry, cracked feet and noticing the next day how much better they look. The time I almost set off the fire alarm warming up a resident's breakfast in the microwave. So for the rest of the day, my coworkers would good-naturedly ask me if I smelt burnt toast. These are the good moments, the saving grace of long-term care for me. the reason why long-term care is worth sticking out and why it's worth trying to fix.
The following passage was actually written by Corey, but she's allowed me the honor to read this here to you today. At the end of it all, everything is a story. Stories are what we have left. There are histories, our imprint on the world, and their echoes linger long after we fade into whatever follows this plane of existence. I knew this before I ever worked in long-term care, thanks to my Grams. I've listened to her tales all my life, her childhood, her mother, sisters and brothers, how she met Pop, raising my dad and my uncles, what it was like for her, who she was, and who she became. I know them by heart, these stories, but I never tell her that she's repeating herself. I treasure them because they are a piece of her history, and therefore a piece of my own. It's important to her, and it's priceless to me. This knowledge of the intrinsic value of both sharing our stories and listening to those of others has deepened since I began my journey into long-term care. I've cared for a person who was fairly lucid and somewhat violent at over 100, and for others who, due to a number of different reasons, have lost everything, including health, by the time they were in their 30s. World War II vets, Vietnam vets, people living in the bitter end of addiction, people with estranged children, people with loved ones who are a constant presence, people of every race, religion, cultural background, and diagnosis. Some just pass through, and some live out their final lives there. The one thing that they all have in common is that each and every one of them has a story to tell to those who are willing to listen. They want to be remembered, not just as we caregivers know them, but from the time before they were sick or hurt, or in some cases, alone. You see, it's not just enough to see them as individuals within the four walls of our facilities. It's important to remember that they are people with a lifetime of experience, a wealth of wisdom that is sometimes buried under their anger or regret or fear or pain. I foolishly used to believe that I was doing them a kindness by taking the time to listen to their stories when I had so many tasks that I had to complete. I had it so backwards. What I've learned by listening to my folks has not only vastly deepened my perspective of life, but also has shown me the remarkable adaptability and perseverance of the human spirit. And oh, the stories. Funny and sad and silly and rich and so very, very human. A gift. If you take these moments and listen closely, you will find yourself in their stories, and they will know that they're not alone.
How many moments do we waste away worrying? How much time is whiled away as we stew and fret over missed opportunities? How much of our lives do we willingly hand over to resentments and anger and fear? The people for whom I've cared throughout the years remind me of that in a million ways, both with words and by action. Many of them have survived cataclysmic events that force them to redefine what exactly it is to live, and yet the sheer joy they derive from the simplest things is truly a sight to behold. It humbles me. The scent of freshly brewed coffee, the comfort of a familiar routine, a well-timed joke, a large bowl of ice cream, a certain song, the small, simple joys that I so often take for granted transcend those in my care to the time before. They don't know they're brave, but I know. I see it. I see it in their strength to live and love and embrace what moments bring them happiness in the face of overwhelming challenges. How could I not be changed by such quiet courage? How could I not be motivated to embrace my own moments? They inspire me. I'm slowly learning how to get out of my own way. And I have a daily reminder to never take moments for granted, and that life is for living and to not waste my time with regrets. Now that is a hell of a job perk.
I'll take a lesson from my residents and I will keep smiling. Happiness is something they snatch from the jaws of despair and boredom. An old person holding on with grim determination to an attitude of youthful delight is quite simply the most badass thing I've seen in my life.
In my perfect world, for every serious violation, the owners and administrators would be required to live for a week in the facility for which they are responsible. Now that would have a serious impact.
The world of long-term care is changing. CNAs are no longer a silent workforce, an easily replaced part of the machine and answering to the label of ass wipers. Earlier this year, CNAs around the country raised their voices together for better pay. And for the most part, the response to this was positive. Yet there still seem to be those who were blindsided.
Where is this coming from?
You said you weren't in this field for the money.
So I guess it's money that you're after all.
If you want real money, get a real job.
Even worse, I think, are the unspoken accusations. A good, selfless CNA shouldn't be concerned with how much money they make. A good and selfless CNA isn't in this for the money after all. But you see, it's not really about the money. It's about what the money represents. Respect. Call us angels or asswipers, but still, we are shoved under the rug and forgotten in the corner. But we do not stand alone. Behind every stressed out CNA, there are anywhere from 10 to 50 residents people who are soiling themselves because there are not enough aides on the floor to meet their needs in a timely fashion. People who are often quite aware that their needs have been placed very low on society's list of priorities.
But with the current paid workloads, the job is still getting done.
I hear this one a lot. It's true, I suppose. CNAs work jobs that have pathetically low pay and where they have to care for a lot more residents than they have fingers and toes on their body. The workloads go hand in hand with the low pay. We're often paid less than a living wage to do the job of 2 or more people. But fewer people are willing to do this anymore. And that is hardly surprising when those of us who remain have to work multiple extra shifts a week or struggle just to keep our families fed. It might seem like an acceptable budget measure to keep the pay and the staffing low, but I assure you, it is not acceptable on the reality of the floor. You cannot give from emptiness, and there is little that drains you quite like exhaustion and stress. The feeling that you've been set up to fail, the feeling that your best is never going to be good enough. Yet we are still expected to provide the best possible care, or else. Here come the ambulance chasers. Here come the write-ups and the state complaints. Policymakers, I'm speaking to you personally. If you truly believe that excellent personal care can be provided to over a dozen residents by an exhausted, stressed out, and fiscally struggling caregiver, come be my resident. Come be my resident and be dependent on me for everything and have to share me with maybe 20 other people who need me just as much. Tell me then that below average pay for caregivers is an acceptable measure. Tell me then that my residents are not worthy of enough respect to give their caregivers a living wage and good working conditions. Tell me then that pushing for higher wages is a sign of greed, that pushing for a better resident-to-aide ratio is a sign of laziness. It's not about the money. It's about what the money represents. Respect for me, for my chosen field, but more importantly, respect for the residents, the elderly, and the disabled that I care for. They are worthy of having a caregiver who isn't scraping by. They are worthy of having a caregiver who isn't a few double shifts away from having a nervous breakdown. They are worthy of my time, and they should be worthy of the money it will take to give them proper and personal care.
Caregiver professionalism means doing your best work when no one is looking or when you think no one cares. This kind of professionalism is at its best, not when conducted in full view of the public, but in the quiet rooms and dark corners of the facility. It is the kind of professionalism that exhibits a profound respect for the trust that you've been given.
Oh, that's just the way it is.
It's always been this way.
It's never going to change.
Why rock the boat?
What difference is it going to make anyway?
It's impossible.
Some of the most useless reasons for inactions are the ones that I've heard most of my life. The fact is, sometimes the boat needs to be rocked. Sometimes it demands it. Furthermore, if everyone bought into that logic, there would still be segregation. Women would still be expected to meekly submit to their husbands, and we would have never landed on the moon. The long-term system is crap. It does not work for the residents, and it does not work for the caregivers. That is the problem broken down to the bare bones. Administrators, management, and owners may argue that they're not getting rich. They may say that it's the nature of the economy, that they do the best they can. I call bullshit. I understand that struggle is a matter of perception, but to compare not being able to buy a third car with having to pull doubles or work 2 jobs just to make rent is both insulting and short-sighted. It would be like me comparing my relatively small worries with my client who had a massive stroke at the prime of her life. There just is no comparison. Private care doesn't offer much more in compensation, though I have more empathy for a family struggling and unable to pay a decent wage than for a facility that is at maximum capacity and hasn't given their workers a raise in years, because I've done both. It should not be financially irresponsible to be a caregiver, but it is. And what happens? What happens when the majority of caregivers end up burnt out, used up, angry, and undertrained and underpaid? What happens when work ethic is no longer considered a valued commodity? I'll tell you what happens. You end up with a section of the caregiver pool that is full of apathetic, short-tempered, and marginal people. Narcotics get stolen all the time from both facilities and homes. Neglect and abuse stats go up. For every awful story you hear on the news, there are 1,000 more that you do not. And for every heartwarming story you hear on the news, there are 1,000 more that you don't. That is the reality. And it continues because society is more concerned about arguing politicians than the actual damage and healing that we do for one another. The good caregivers, the smart ones who see this job for what it could be and what it should be, usually move on to a more lucrative field. But I believe there's an alternative. Let's change it. How?
We're just caregivers.
No one listens.
Speak your truth anyway. Keep speaking it.
Shout it!
It's time to make our voices heard, to make our clients' and residents' voices heard.
We have a moral imperative to stand up and speak for those who will not or cannot speak for themselves.
If not us, then who?
There are a million ways to be an active part of the solution.
Start a support group.
Write an editorial.
Exchange ideas.
Just be involved.
Change happens slowly, but it has to start somewhere.
Why not with all of us?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.